Sarah Mitchell adjusted her reading glasses and focused on the computer screen in front of her. The accounting office was quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers from her colleague's desk. Outside the window, she could see commercial planes taking off from the nearby airport, their silver bodies catching the afternoon sun as they climbed into the blue sky. She forced herself to look away. Those planes always made her stomach twist with something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was longing. Maybe it was fear. After 12 years of working as a senior accountant for Henderson and Associates, she had become an expert at ignoring the feelings that arose whenever aircraft passed overhead. "Sarah, did you finish the Morrison account reconciliation?" asked Janet, her supervisor, poking her head around the cubicle wall. "Almost done," Sarah replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Numbers had become her refuge. They were predictable, logical, and most importantly, they kept her feet firmly planted on the ground. At 34, Sarah had built what most people would consider a perfectly normal life. She had a small apartment downtown, a reliable car, and a job that paid well enough for her simple needs. Her coworkers knew her as the quiet, dependable type who never missed deadlines and rarely talked about her past. She preferred it that way. During her lunch break, Sarah walked to the small cafe across the street. The owner, Mrs. Chen, always greeted her with a warm smile and had her usual order ready before she even asked. Turkey sandwich on whole wheat, no mayo, with a side of fruit. "You know, Sarah," Mrs. Chen said as she handed over the bag. "My nephew is single. He's a doctor. Very nice boy. Maybe you two could meet sometime?" Sarah smiled politely, the same smile she gave whenever someone tried to set her up. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen. But I'm really focused on my career right now." It wasn't entirely a lie. She was focused on her career, but not for the reasons people assumed. Her job wasn't a passion, it was camouflage, a way to blend in and remain invisible in a world that moved at ground level. As she walked back to the office, a familiar sound made her freeze in the middle of the sidewalk. The deep, thunderous roar of military jets echoed overhead. She looked up to see two F-16 seconds flying in formation, probably heading to the air show that was happening at the base this weekend. Her heart began to race, and her hands started to shake. "Excuse me, miss. Are you okay?" An elderly man had stopped beside her, concern written across his weathered face. Sarah realized she was standing in the middle of the busy sidewalk, staring at the sky while people walked around her. "I'm fine," she said quickly, tucking a strand of brown hair behind her ear. Just admiring the planes." The man smiled. "They're beautiful machines, aren't they? My son's in the Air Force. Flies those same jets. Makes an old father proud." Sarah nodded and hurried back to her building, but the man's words echoed in her head for the rest of the day. She remembered her own father's pride. So many years ago, when she had graduated at the top of her class from the Air Force Academy, she remembered the weight of his hand on her shoulder the day she earned her wings, the tears in his eyes when she told him she'd been accepted into the elite fighter pilot program. She also remembered his confusion and disappointment when she suddenly resigned her commission 12 years ago, just 3 months after the incident that changed everything. That evening, Sarah sat in her small kitchen, picking at a frozen dinner while the local news played in the background. She wasn't really paying attention until she heard the anchor mention something about the upcoming air show. "The annual Thunder Over Mountains Air Show will take place this weekend at Peterson Air Force Base," the reporter said. "This year's show will feature the debut performance of the new F-22 Raptor demonstration team, led by Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, who recently returned from deployment overseas." Sarah's fork clattered to the floor. Marcus Rodriguez. She hadn't heard that name in 12 years, but it hit her like a physical blow. Her hands trembled as she reached for the remote to turn up the volume. The screen showed file footage of the sleek F-22, and then cut to an interview with Colonel Rodriguez himself. He looked older, more lines around his eyes, but his confident smile was exactly the same as she remembered, the same smile that had made her 22-year-old heart skip beats during their training days at Nellis Air Force Base. "The F-22 represents the pinnacle of American air superiority," he was saying to the reporter. "These demonstrations show the public what their tax dollars have built. and honor the legacy of all the pilots who came before us. Sarah fumbled for the remote and turned off the television, but the damage was done. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her past were already starting to crack. For 12 years, she had successfully avoided anything that might connect her to her former life. No military events, no air shows, no contact with anyone from her old squadron. She had even changed her last name back to her maiden name after her brief marriage ended, just to be extra safe. But now Marcus was here, less than 20 miles away, and the past was threatening to come rushing back like a flood. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Hello. Is this Captain Sarah Jensen?" The voice was crisp. Military. Unfamiliar. Sarah's blood ran cold. No one had called her by that name in over a decade. "I think you have the wrong number," she said, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Colonel James Carter from Peterson Air Force Base. I need to speak with you about a matter of national security. Can we meet?" The phone slipped from Sarah's suddenly nerveless fingers. After all these years of hiding, they had found her. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the cockpit of her F-16, the desert landscape stretching endlessly below her. The radio crackling with urgent voices that she had tried so hard to forget. She gave up trying to rest at 5 in the morning and made herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Lieutenant Colonel Carter had agreed to meet her at a small diner outside the city. Neutral ground, he had called it. Sarah arrived 20 minutes early, choosing a corner booth where she could see the entrance. She ordered black coffee and waited, her stomach churning with anxiety. Carter walked through the door at exactly 8 o'clock. He was younger than she had expected, maybe late 30s, with the straight posture and confident stride that marked him as a career military officer. His eyes scanned the diner until they found her, and Sarah felt a familiar chill run down her spine. Even after all these years, she could still recognize that look, the way military personnel assessed everything around them for potential threats or advantages. "Miss Mitchell," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "I didn't really feel like I had a choice," Sarah replied, wrapping her hands around her coffee mug for warmth. "How did you find me?" Carter opened a manila folder and pulled out several photographs. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They were pictures of her from her Air Force days, young, confident, wearing the flight suit that had once felt like a second skin. In one photo, she was standing next to her F-16, helmet tucked under her arm, grinning at the camera with the fearlessness that only came with youth and ignorance of how quickly everything could go wrong. "Captain Sarah Jensen, call sign, Phoenix." Carter read from a file. "Graduated top of your class from the Air Force Academy. Completed advanced fighter training with honors. Served 2 deployments in Afghanistan. Excellent service record until..." He paused, looking up at her with curious eyes. "Until you suddenly resigned your commission in 2012. No explanation given, no disciplinary action on record. You just disappeared." Sarah stared at the photographs, her younger self looking back at her like a ghost. "That person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe not, but we need her skills." Carter leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's a situation developing that requires a very specific set of abilities. Someone who can fly the F-22 Raptor, someone with combat experience, and someone who's been out of the system long enough that their involvement won't raise any flags with foreign intelligence services." "I haven't flown in 12 years, Sarah said quickly. "I wouldn't even know how to start an F-22. The technology has completely changed since my time." "Actually, that's not entirely true." Carter pulled out another photograph, this one showing Sarah in a different aircraft. Sleek, angular, unmistakably an F-22. This was taken during the classified test program in 2011. "You were one of only 6 pilots selected to fly the prototype F-22 variants. According to the records, you were the best natural pilot they'd ever seen in that aircraft." The memory hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had forgotten that Carter might have access to classified records. The F-22 test program had been the pinnacle of her career, the thing she had been most proud of. For 6 months, she had been part of an elite group testing modifications to the Raptor that would never be made public. She had felt invincible in that aircraft, like she was flying a piece of the future. "That was before," she whispered. "Before what, Captain?" Carter's voice was gentle but insistent. "What happened in Afghanistan that made you walk away from everything?" Sarah closed her eyes, and suddenly she was there again. The mission had been routine: escort a convoy of supply trucks through a dangerous pass in the mountains. She and her wingman, Lieutenant Tony Vasquez, had been providing air cover when the ambush happened. Ground forces trapped in a narrow canyon, enemy fighters on the ridges above, and a call for immediate close air support. "There was a wedding," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "We got bad intelligence. The convoy we were protecting was delivering supplies to a remote village. There was a celebration happening, and our intelligence said it was an enemy gathering. When the shooting started, I was ordered to provide fire support." Carter waited silently, sensing that pushing her would only make her shut down. "I followed orders," Sarah continued. "I made the attack run exactly as trained. The targets were neutralized, mission successful." She looked up at Carter, her eyes filled with pain that hadn't diminished in 12 years. 23 civilians died, including 7 children. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing. The bad intelligence wasn't her fault. The rules of engagement had been followed precisely. But Sarah couldn't forget the images from the aftermath. The destroyed building that had been decorated with flowers for a celebration. The bodies of people who had been guilty of nothing more than being in the wrong place when the war came to their village. "I submitted my resignation the day I got back to base," Sarah said. "I couldn't trust myself to make those decisions anymore. Every time I got in the cockpit, all I could see were those faces." Carter nodded slowly. "I've read the classified reports. You weren't responsible for what happened. Doesn't matter," Sarah said firmly. "I was the one who pulled the trigger. And now we need someone who understands the weight of that responsibility," Carter said. "This isn't about glory or proving anything. It's about preventing something much worse from happening." He pulled out a satellite photograph that showed what appeared to be a military installation in a mountainous region. "3 days ago, we lost contact with an undercover operative in a hostile country. His last transmission indicated that he had discovered plans for a terrorist attack on American soil using stolen military technology. We have a narrow window to extract him before he's discovered, but the location is heavily defended. We need someone who can fly an F-22 on a mission that officially doesn't exist." Sarah stared at the photograph, her mind automatically analyzing the terrain and defensive positions the way she had been trained to do. "Why can't you use active-duty pilots?" "Because this mission is completely off the books," Carter explained. "If something goes wrong, if the pilot is captured, the United States government needs complete deniability. We need someone who officially doesn't exist in our current system. Someone like you." "And Marcus Rodriguez, is he involved in this?" Carter looked surprised. "You know, Colonel Rodriguez? We worked together before." Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. "Is he part of this mission?" "He's been briefed on the situation, yes. In fact, he was the one who recommended you for this assignment." Carter closed the folder and looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "He said you were the best pilot he ever flew with, and the only person he would trust with something this important." Sarah felt her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. Marcus had remembered her, had thought of her for this mission, the man she had walked away from 12 years ago, along with everything else she had loved about flying. "I need time to think," she said, starting to slide out of the booth. "I'm afraid we don't have much time," Carter said. "The window for this mission closes in 72 hours. After that, our operative is on his own, and whatever he discovered dies with him." Sarah stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I'll give you my answer tonight." As she walked toward her car, Carter called after her. "Captain Jensen, Phoenix, whatever you decide, I want you to know that your country hasn't forgotten what you sacrificed. What happened in Afghanistan wasn't your fault, but walking away from flying was your choice to make. This mission, this is your chance to choose again. Sarah drove back to her apartment in a daze, Carter's words echoing in her head. For 12 years, she had convinced herself that she was better off on the ground, that she had made the right decision to leave flying behind. But now, faced with the possibility of getting back in the cockpit, she realized that part of her had never stopped being a pilot. Part of her had been waiting for someone to call her Phoenix again. Sarah spent the entire day walking through the city, her mind spinning with memories and possibilities. She found herself standing outside the airport fence, watching planes take off and land, feeling the familiar pull in her chest that she had spent 12 years trying to ignore. A group of children pressed against the fence beside her, their faces lit up with wonder as a massive Boeing 777 thundered overhead. "My dad flies planes like that," one little girl told her friend proudly. "He says it's like being a bird. Except better because you get to come home." The innocence in the child's voice hit Sarah harder than any of Carter's arguments had. Flying wasn't just about war and destruction. It was about exploration, about pushing boundaries, about the pure joy of defying gravity. She had forgotten that part. By evening, Sarah had made her decision. She called the number Carter had given her. "I'll do it," she said simply when he answered. "Good. Be at Peterson Air Force Base tomorrow at 0600 hours. Ask for Hangar 7. And Captain? Thank you. Thank you." The next morning, Sarah drove through the gates of Peterson Air Force Base, for the first time in over a decade. Everything felt familiar yet foreign. The smell of jet fuel in the air, the sound of engines warming up in the distance, the purposeful stride of personnel going about their duties. She had forgotten how alive a military base felt, how everyone moved with a sense of mission and belonging. Hangar 7 was at the far end of the flight line, isolated from the main activities of the base. Sarah showed her temporary ID to the guard and was escorted inside. The hangar was dimly lit, but in the center sat the most beautiful aircraft she had ever seen, an F-22 Raptor, its gray surfaces seeming to absorb the light around it. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Sarah turned to see Marcus Rodriguez walking toward her, and her heart skipped a beat just like it had all those years ago. He was older, with silver threading through his dark hair and new lines around his eyes. But his confident smile was exactly the same. "Hello, Phoenix," he said softly. "Hello, Marcus." Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious in her civilian clothes, surrounded by the military environment she had once called home. "It's been a long time. Too long." Marcus stopped a few feet away from her, his hands clasped behind his back in a familiar military pose. "I heard about Afghanistan. I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." Sarah looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I made my choice." "You made a choice based on pain and guilt," Marcus said gently. "But you're here now, and that's what matters. This mission needs the best pilot available, and that's still you." Over the next few hours, Sarah was reintroduced to the world she had left behind. The F-22 was like nothing she had ever flown, more advanced, more capable, more deadly than the F-16 seconds of her past. The cockpit was a symphony of digital displays and computer systems, but somehow it felt like coming home. "The aircraft is almost completely automated," explained Chief Master Sergeant Williams, the senior technician who would be preparing the plane for the mission. "But in a situation like this, where you might need to go completely dark and avoid all electronic detection, you'll be flying mostly on manual controls." "Just like the old days," Sarah nodded, her hands moving instinctively over the controls as muscle memory began to return. It was like riding a bicycle. Except, this bicycle could break the sound barrier and disappear from radar. The mission briefing was held in a secure conference room with no windows. Carter laid out the details with military precision. The operative, codenamed Blackbird, was being held in a compound in a mountainous region that Sarah couldn't officially know the location of. The window for extraction was narrow. 6 hours of darkness during a new moon that would provide maximum concealment. "The compound is surrounded by surface-to-air missile systems," Carter explained, pointing to satellite images on the wall. but there's a narrow corridor through the mountains that should allow you to approach undetected. You'll need to fly at extremely low altitude, using the terrain to mask your approach. Sarah studied the maps and photographs, her tactical mind automatically calculating approach angles, escape routes, and contingency plans. It felt good to be thinking like a pilot again, to be solving problems that mattered. "What's the extraction plan?" she asked. "There isn't one," Marcus said quietly. "Blackbird will need to make his way to a designated pickup point. Your job is to provide air cover and escort the extraction helicopter out of hostile airspace. If anything goes wrong, you have authorization to engage any threats." The weight of those words settled over Sarah like a familiar burden. Once again, she would be in a position to make decisions about life and death. But this time felt different. This time, she would be protecting innocent people instead of making tragic mistakes based on bad intelligence. The mission launched at 2,300 hours on a moonless night. Sarah sat in the cockpit of the F-22, running through her final checks as the hangar doors opened to reveal the star-filled sky beyond. Her heart was racing, but it was excitement rather than fear. For the first time in 12 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. "Phoenix, this is Control." Marcus's voice crackled through her headset. "You are cleared for takeoff. Bring our guy home." "Copy that, Control. Phoenix is airborne." The F-22 lifted off the runway with a power and grace that took Sarah's breath away. As she climbed into the night sky, leaving the lights of Colorado Springs behind, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Pure, unadulterated joy. The flight to the target area took 3 hours, most of it at high altitude before descending into the mountains for the final approach. Sarah flew through valleys so narrow that her wingtips nearly touched the rocky walls, using the F-22's advanced navigation systems to thread the needle between radar sites and missile batteries. The extraction went flawlessly. Blackbird made it to the pickup point with intelligence that would later prevent a major terrorist attack on American soil. The rescue helicopter extracted him without incident, and Sarah provided cover as they flew back to friendly territory. No shots were fired, no lives were lost, and an American operative came home safely. As Sarah landed back at Peterson Air Force Base just as the sun was rising, she realized that something fundamental had changed inside her. The guilt and fear that had consumed her for 12 years hadn't disappeared, but they no longer controlled her. She was still the pilot who had made a terrible mistake in Afghanistan, but she was also the pilot who had just helped save countless innocent lives. Marcus was waiting for her as she climbed out of the cockpit, along with Carter and the rest of the mission support team. "Outstanding work, Captain," Carter said, shaking her hand. "That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen." But Sarah barely heard him. She was looking at Marcus, who was watching her with something that looked like pride, mixed with relief. "So," he said as the others dispersed to handle the post-mission paperwork, "what happens now? Are you going back to your accounting job?" Sarah looked at the F-22, its engines still cooling in the morning air, then back at the man who had recommended her for this mission. Despite everything that had happened between them, "I don't know," she said honestly. "I spent 12 years trying to forget I was ever a pilot. But I can't forget anymore. And I'm not sure I want to." "The Air Force has a program for experienced pilots who want to return to active duty," Marcus said carefully. "It's not common, but it's possible, especially for someone with your skills and experience." Sarah felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. The first genuine smile she had felt in years. "Are you trying to recruit me, Colonel Rodriguez?" "Maybe," Marcus grinned back. "The world needs good pilots, Phoenix. Pilots who understand that flying isn't just about machines and missions. It's about bringing people home safe." As Sarah walked away from the hangar that morning, she realized that hiding from her past hadn't made her a different person. It had just made her an incomplete one. She would never stop being the pilot who had made a terrible mistake in Afghanistan. But she didn't have to stop being a pilot altogether. For the first time in 12 years, Captain Sarah Phoenix Jensen was ready to fly again. 3 months later, Sarah submitted her application to return to active duty. 6 months after that, She was back in the cockpit of an F-22, this time wearing the uniform she had earned the right to wear. The past would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the end of her story. Sometimes, the best way to move forward is to remember who you used to be, and then choose to become something even better.